Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Connect. I hope and pray that tonight is going to be an encouraging evening for you and for everyone in your group. If you've been at church over the last couple of Sundays, you'll know that the last couple of topics that we've been looking at have been particularly challenging and particularly difficult as we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount together. We've been thinking about lust, we've been thinking about adultery, we've been thinking about divorce and what the Bible has to say about these things. And maybe the last couple of Sundays have been particularly difficult for you. The sort of times where we are reminded not only of our own sin, our own lust, our own adultery, but actually about sin that's been committed against us as well. And the danger is that when we are reminded again of sin in our lives and sin against us, maybe that sin can just feel so overwhelming that you feel the crushing weight of sin. And actually, when we're reminded of our sin, it can cause us to want to run away, to hide. But really, what we want to do tonight, as we think through what we've been hearing over the last couple of Sundays, we want to see again, our sin doesn't need to cause us to run away. Actually, our sin should cause us only to run in one direction. And of course, that is to Jesus himself. And that's what we want to do tonight, as individuals and as a group. Point one another to Jesus again. To remember that his grace, his mercy, his love, his comfort is offered to us by faith alone. And so, instead of running away, tonight we want to run to Jesus. And that's why we thought it would just be great. Let's just take some time in Psalm 51. If you don't know too much about this psalm, it was written by King David, and it was written at an incredibly low point in his life. David was obviously known as a man after God's own heart. And yet, the very things that we've been talking about over the last couple of Sundays, he committed them. He was lustful. He committed adultery. He wrote this psalm after he'd been confronted about his sin of lust against a woman who wasn't his wife. And more than that, that lust led to an affair. And that affair led to a murder, murdering the husband of the woman that he'd slept with in order to try and hide his sin. It led to an abuse of his power because he was king. It led to lie upon lie upon lie, trying to cover up the whole thing. David was an absolute mess, committed the worst of sins, and yet he is the one who God inspired to write the opening words of Psalm 51. Let me read it. He writes, "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin." It's just so helpful to see here, isn't it, that David totally owns his sin. He doesn't make any excuses. He doesn't try to shift the blame. He doesn't try to say, well, it's because of circumstance, it's because of the family I was born into. He doesn't do any of that. He just owns his sin. This psalm it's so honest, it's so heartfelt. It's a true confession of his brokenness. And who is David confessing to ultimately? You look there, we see he's confessing ultimately to God. Now, this can be really hard to admit, can't it? That none of us are okay. All of us are broken, both because of things we have done and because of things that have been done against us. Every single one of us is in real need of help, in real need of redemption. And David recognizes that ultimately that help and that redemption can only come from the person who he's ultimately sinned against. And who is that? Look at verse 4. David says, "Against you, God, you only have I sinned." What we're seeing here in this psalm is that when we sin, whilst it might impact our lives horizontally, like David's sin massively impacted Bathsheba, the woman he slept with, and his own family and her family, whilst it impacted that way, ultimately, all sin is vertical. All sin is vertical, not horizontal. Because behind every lust, behind every adultery, behind every unfaithfulness is sin. And it's sin that offends God. Our sin offends God. But that also means that sin that's being committed against us also offends God. And there's real comfort in that for us. All sin is ultimately vertical. None of us are okay. We're all born into sin. Our biggest problem isn't our circumstance. It isn't the things we have done. Actually, our biggest problem is our sin, is our hearts, it's our condition. And so maybe as we felt the weight of that over the last couple of weeks, let's camp out in verse 10 tonight. Because where is the hope for us? Where is the hope in this psalm? Look at verse 10. David says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." Ultimately, this psalm is pointing us to Jesus, the only one who can offer us a new heart, the only one who can offer us a new start. He renews us. One of the best things about the gospel is that it's a story of never-ending new beginnings. So whatever convictions, whatever circumstances and sadness we've been reminded of over the last couple of Sundays, take it to Jesus. Take it to Jesus, because in him there is renewal, there are new beginnings. And as verse 12 says, there is joy. As David says, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation." Listen, whatever our sin is, whatever sin we've committed, whatever sins have been committed against us, Jesus offers us genuine, deep, true joy tonight. So we don't need to run away. Tonight we can run to Jesus. So I encourage you, do that together in your groups. As you get into the questions, be honest with one another, encourage one another, and bring your requests, bring all that you need to Jesus tonight. Hope it's a great one.